This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
This episode of Leap Forward welcomes Anne Watson, Chief Executive Officer at Engenuity, the charity tackling the UK's critical engineering skills gap. As manufacturing faces a perfect storm of retiring talent and rapid tech change, Anne shares how Engenuity bridges the divide through innovative solutions like skills games and AI-powered training tools. She reveals how collaboration can future-proof our workforce and why lifelong learning is now non-negotiable for engineers, employers, and educators alike.
So I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming Anne Watson from Engenuity to this edition of Leap Forward. Anne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be with you, Justin.
So first of all, let's kick things off. Tell us a little bit about your current role and the organisation.
So I'm Chief Executive of the Engenuity Group. And the Engenuity Group is a charitable group working across the engineering and manufacturing sector. We've got a very, very long history of working with the sector, going back to the 1960s in the days of the original levy. And the raison d'etre for Engenuity and our commercial subsidiaries is all about ensuring that employers in the engineering and manufacturing sector have the people and the skills that they need to be successful. So today and in the kind of the current economy, Engenuity and what we do is becoming even more relevant as more and more employers are really struggling to find the skills that they need.
What a great introduction, and so relevant to this obviously this podcast and you know what it's all about. Before we kind of get into that, which I'm really excited about, just give us a little bit of a kind of background. What was the journey to date? Bring it to life for us.
Well, I must admit, when I was at school, I never said I wanted to be the chief exec of a charitable group. I probably didn't even know what one was really. So I think probably like lots of people, I kind of meandered and found myself in this particular role. I grew up in the northeast of England. I was the first person to go to university in my family. And to be honest, I went to university because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. It was that kind of usual, not quite sure of what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I went to university. I studied business studies again because it gave me choices. It allowed me to kind of try different subjects and work out where I had an affinity, what I enjoyed. And actually that led me into marketing. So I think through that whole piece, it showed me that I wasn't cut out to be an accountant. I'm one of those people who know what the answer is, but it takes me 3 goes on a calculator to work out what it means. And yeah, I went into marketing. My first role after leaving university was a very small engineering company in Lancashire. I was still in fusion bonded epoxy coatings for oil and gas pipelines, which wasn't the kind of, I guess, the sexiest of things to try and sell, but it gave me a really good grounding in kind of technical marketing and also the engineering sector. And then from there, I moved on to be the UK marketing manager for a larger engineering company. And I did that for about 18 months. And that had me selling things like blast furnaces and wonderful things like that. And then I left that role and actually went into, for a short period of time, I went to work for a skills body that focused in the clothing sector. Did that for about 9 months. I actually got made redundant. Thought that was the end of the world and I was never going to recover from that. And actually what that led me to was joining the group where I am now as their marketing manager. And what that did actually for me was bring together marketing, engineering and skills to all the kind of the strands of my career. And I've been with Engenuity Group now for about 25 years. So whoever says to you that an SME can't give you progression opportunities is wrong. because I started life as a marketing manager, was able to progress through the organisation, taking on different roles, becoming managing director of their biggest commercial subsidiary. And then about 10 years ago, actually becoming chief executive of the group. And it's a brilliant place to work. There's so much variety. And actually every day we're making a difference to the sector and to individuals. And that really is something that kind of gets me out of bed every morning.
And I can really get that sense from, the way you just described, the role. And as you said at the beginning of the conversation, now more than ever, give us a sort of sense of kind of, where you really feel we are right now. Give us some context.
I think in terms of context, we've always talked within kind of the engineering and manufacturing sector for many, many years about having a skills gap. We need more people than are actually coming into the sector. We've got a perception issue with young people, although that is getting better, but it's taking some time. We lost lots of people as a result of the pandemic, who obviously were looking at their life choices and deciding that actually they wanted to kind of do something different, perhaps take early retirement. So we lost a lot of people naturally as a result of the pandemic, but also we lost a lot of people just as a result of organisations actually having to reduce their kind of workforce. So that has really kind of made the situation move, I think, from a skills gap to a skills crisis, because now what we're facing is not just not having enough skills, but not having enough people within the sector. So I think this is the context. And then when you overlay that with some of the decisions that came out of the budget, so some of the national insurance contribution increases, discussions that we're talking about today is President Trump is calling it Liberation Day. Well, that actually could either tonight or tomorrow, we could see lots of the UK industries and particularly the manufacturing sector get hit by tariffs. So not only is our sector really kind of desperate for skills and desperate to recruit, but then they've got this other kind of economic kind of tidal wave coming towards them in terms of that reducing the economic headroom within their own organisation. So we know that employers now are talking about having to make some tough decisions, having to freeze recruitment, really having to look at their workforce. And I think it's going to be really difficult going forward. But I think as the UK has shown previously, actually it's a country that can rally. I think employers really want to do the right thing by their workforce. They want to do the right thing by the young people. And hopefully what we're going through at the moment is just going to be an economic blip. And hopefully we will see that very quickly we will realise that actually tariffs are not the right thing for any country. And we may just then at some point get back to normal, and fingers crossed we do.
And how do you see the role of ingenuity in dealing with these challenges in terms of whether it's the crisis, the gap, the perception, and further kind of economic kind of, I suppose, in a sense, sort of headwinds?
Yeah, I think ingenuity, we really see ourselves, I think, kind of fulfilling three key roles. I think one is helping to kind of break down the barriers and helping employers just navigate the system. The skills system is incredibly complex, and it's made more complex by the fact that skills is devolved. So actually, we're not just talking about a UK skills system. We're talking about skills system in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, all being very different. And if you're an employer that actually works across those countries, you're working across two different systems and it becomes very, very complex. We also do a lot of work with small employers and small manufacturers who need lots of hand-holding. They desperately want to recruit young people. They desperately want to recruit people, but they don't know how to navigate the system. How do they recruit an apprentice? So we very much see kind of a big part of our role is that kind of that breaking down the barriers and just helping remove some of the blockages in the system. The second, I think, is about, we call it being the sector connector. And that's how do we join some of the dots? Because we really believe that we're not going to solve the skills challenge unless we work together and we work in partnership and collaboration. So it's always about how do we join the dots? How do we learn from different organisations and learn from their best practice and help other people to adopt it rather than duplicate or compete with each other? And then the third strand is actually, as a charity, we've got the opportunity to invest. So we also actually invest in initiatives and activities that we know are going to make a difference. So some of the activities that we've been involved in supporting has been offering subsidised leadership training to leaders and managers of small businesses who've never had that opportunity before, but are now having to operate in a very volatile economic situation. We've helped some young people move into higher education and be able to take engineering degrees that they wouldn't normally be able to afford. We've been able to help disadvantaged adults get access to higher education and embark on master's programs to give them qualifications in data science and AI, so areas that we know the sector needs, but also at the same time helping adults that wouldn't normally have access to higher education because they're either full-time carers or working a full-time job. And it's really, I think, when you see the difference that we can make to individuals and to their employers, it's really powerful actually just to see how a small amount of funding can be absolutely life-changing for somebody.
It's really good to hear some of the kind of the positive impact that you're having, and in particularly kind of in the context of kind of what you framed, where we are right now. And it's really interesting also to hear about sort of your use of data science and AI, and one of the things that sort of I'd be really keen to kind of get your perspective on is kind of the rate of change, and the rise and adoption of transformative kind of technology, and of course we have to mention the AI word. How is that sort of adding, kind of further kind of challenges and opportunities to kind of your role?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, technology is playing a huge part. And it's also adding an extra complexity to skills and skills gaps. I think some years ago, organisations would talk about maybe upskilling their workforce every 10 years. Now, if you speak to that same organisation, they're talking about having to upskill their workforce every 3 years. And if you're working in a more digital area, you talk about at least every 18 months. So that pace of technological change, as it grows, gives us opportunities, but actually we're almost a little bit kind of hamster wheel in terms of skills. And how do you build into organizations, but also build that kind of culture of that lifelong learning? Because it's something that I think from a UK perspective, and also for many countries, lifelong learning is not something that we're used to. We kind of go to school, we then may go to college, or we go into work, and we might do some things while we're in the workplace. But I think it's that whole cultural shift for us as a country to get that position of being constantly learning and almost learning that skill of how you constantly learn. Because I think it's going to come to the point where it's not about necessarily having really deep knowledge in subject areas. It's going to be, how do you apply that knowledge? And how do you apply that knowledge to different situations so that you can work in different roles and different sectors, and we can compete as a country. I think the other piece for Ingenuity is obviously we're looking at how we can use that technology and how we can use AI internally. We've launched our own kind of version of ChatGPT, which we're called Ngenie, and that's to see how we can be more productive, how we can give access to information to our own people much more quickly, and increase our own efficiency and productivity. So we're actually spending more time helping other organisations rather than spending more time on administrative tasks internally. But we've also launched things like a future skills hub, because we recognise, again, for small businesses, many of them have not heard of ChatGPT or understand what that means for their business. Many of them are just embarking on digitalisation. So we've launched a future skills hub where we really try and kind of demystify some of these new technologies for the smaller businesses, and then help to signpost them to other organisations or other stakeholders that can kind of really give them some more detailed help in terms of how they can start using some of this technology in anger to support their own businesses.
And going back to sort of, your kind of what you see as your kind of three core kind of roles, just really interested in the perception side of that, in terms of the pace of change. You used the words of demystify. Kind of like what sort of do you sort of see as a major kind of set of initiatives to kind of really sort of break down those barriers and sort of kind of challenge or transform that kind of perception? Because I guess there are some people out there that see the UK as a world leader in engineering and manufacturing in many ways, and there's others who see us or don't even see that, right? So and particularly I guess that the talent that you want to bring into the sector. So tell me more about what you're up to there.
Yeah, there's a big, I think, a big perception piece. You're absolutely right. I think there's some individuals that are close to the sector and see what it's like and see how fantastic it can be. I mean, if you go to an automotive plant today, the level of robotics, I always think, is almost like a really choreographed kind of ballet, because you've got all of the moving parts coming in, everything works seamlessly, and it's a kind of a joy to behold. It's a really technologically clean, really fascinating environment. But I think lots of our young people and teachers and parents and their influencers, I still think of the kind of the engineering manufacturing sector as big factories blowing out lots of black smoke and very dirty and not a place for their kind of their pupils or their sons or daughters to go and work within. And I think that's where we've got to change the perception. We are getting there, but I think it is like turning it a super tanker. Because actually we've got to get to young people when they're in primary school and start to talk to them about the opportunities in the sector. The fact that it's probably one of the few sectors that you can join working in automotive and you develop a set of skills that you can take to work in the aerospace sector or food and drink or even space. So working in the engineering and manufacturing sector gives you a fantastic kind of foundation of skills which you can take anywhere. And I think that's one of the kind of the brilliant factors around the sector. We've got to get those messages out. One of the things that Ingenuity has been doing is, again, thinking about technology and how do you engage with young people, is we've developed a series of Minecraft games called Skills Miner, where each of the games is actually set in a different engineering context. So we've got one based in a kind of a car factory, we've got one around aerospace, one around vertical farming, and one around kind of domestic home energy. So we're really trying to plug into some of the interests of the young people in terms of things like sustainable food. So vertical farming, yes, you may not think it's engineering and manufacturing, but the number of engineers that are actually behind the scenes in terms of a vertical farm and the science that goes with that is quite extraordinary. So as they go through the different contexts of engineering, they start to understand and they start to learn about the future of flight, sustainable fuels, autonomous vehicles. And as they go through completing the challenges, actually, hopefully they start to realise that engineering and STEM could be for them, because we start to demonstrate that they're showing a set of skills that really demonstrates that they've got a hidden engineer within them. And the feedback we've got in terms of changing perception has been really fantastic. Just from, as I say, from playing games and tapping into what kids these days are really interested in. We're hoping that we'll get another boom, because there's a Minecraft movie, I'm told, which is coming out soon.
I think it's out today, actually.
Is it?
Brilliant,
Perfect.
brilliant timing.
Yeah, so hopefully that will give us another kind of generation of young people who will start looking and being interested in Minecraft, and through Minecraft actually be able to kind of enter the world of engineering.
That's really innovative, and it's really exciting to hear. I love the fact that you've chosen Minecraft as the kind of the channel almost, and then you've kind of made then the topics in that channel so relevant, and obviously to your point around helping people realize the applicability of that to the world of work and progression. When you think about the lifelong learning journey, obviously you've talked there. Many, I'm sure, adults, are still, avid Minecraft users themselves. But how do you then continue that, into secondary and into tertiary? What are the kind of key challenges, once you've got them at primary? How do you then keep them in secondary and develop them in tertiary, I suppose, in a way?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is for me is that continuity. So once we've got them at primary, absolutely, how do we then keep them engaged and keep them all the way through secondary, even perhaps into kind of A levels if they choose to take the more academic route rather than apprenticeships, and all the way through. And actually, I think that's something where we as a sector probably need to look at ourselves more closely, because we've got so many different initiatives out there targeted at young people, trying to encourage them into STEM careers. And I think at last count, there was over 600. So we're doing a huge amount of work as a sector and throwing lots of effort and resources and money at it, but we're very fragmented. So I think there's a lot more that we can do as a sector to say, we don't need 600 initiatives. Why don't we choose kind of one, two, or three that we know really works? And we all stand behind those initiatives so we do get that continuity. And I think it's very much a case of almost that reaction to market failure. We know that careers advice isn't as good as it could be. We know that teachers are incredibly busy, so don't know what's on their doorstep in terms of local engineering manufacturing companies, because they've got lots of other things to do. And I think it's for us as a sector to kind of come together and reduce some of that noise, and get our messages much clearer than we are currently. So definitely much more work to be done.
And that's really, I suppose, where your sort of sector connector kind of point kicks in, right? And
yeah,
I guess
the collaboration, partnership.
Yeah, I can see that really clearly, that almost those three things that you do, that they're almost sort of some ways connected, aren't they? I suppose in a sense themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Ingenuity's perspective, it's not about us having to do everything. It's about how we can elevate other people's impacts, how they can elevate our impact. Because fundamentally, I think everybody is here for the best for the sector. We want it to be a very productive sector. We want the UK economy to be thriving. We want to be one of the most productive in the world. So actually, the base objectives are all the same. It is through that kind of sector connector, that collaboration, that partnership, that kind of mutual benefit that I think we will really get.
When you were talking about skill systems, and you were talking about England and Wales and Scotland and Ireland, it made me think about sort of the global skill system that exists, and so much, I guess, of what we do in the UK when it comes to engineering manufacturing is operating in a global supply chain, a global marketplace. How do you kind of collaborate and partner with kind of other bodies around the world to try and share that sort of best practice more globally? And I guess linked to that, where would you place the UK on sort of, how would you score yourself or the UK, if you were issuing a report on us in terms of where we are on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of kind of from an international perspective, I think there's two key pieces for me. I think one is about international learnings. It's what can we learn from other countries. So we know that kind of Germany's always had a very strong technical education system. Some would say it's a little bit too rigid. I think one of the great advantages of that is actually it doesn't change, and I think that's one of the downsides. I think to the kind of certainly the English system is that as parliaments change, as governments change, as skills ministers change, you get somebody incoming with a different idea and want to do something differently. So there's a whole host of change when it comes to a kind of a skills system within certainly England and the UK versus kind of GCSEs and A levels and the more academic piece, which has much more stability. So we know that there's learnings from Germany. We also know that countries like Singapore, they have things like Ministry of Manpower. So they take a much more strategic view to skills, and they look much further out in terms of what the country needs. And they're then able to kind of work backwards and make sure that what is being taught is actually not just meeting kind of current skills needs, but also future skills needs. So from an Ingenuity perspective, we do kind of a lot of that horizon scanning in terms of actually what are other countries doing? What can we learn from? What do their job descriptions look like? What skills are they starting to recruit for? Because actually, if we've got countries that are a couple of years ahead of the UK, and we can spot that they're for let's say for a maintenance engineer, they've added these new skills into a job description. That tells us something about what actually might be coming along the line that we can start to better prepare for. I think the other interesting piece from an international perspective is the UK has got a really good reputation in certain countries in terms of its vocational and its technical education system. So from an ingenuity perspective, we're getting increasingly number of requests from different countries to help them in terms of their technical education and their vocational piece. So we're currently doing a piece of work at the moment in Jamaica, looking at their manufacturing sector and how can we help kind of the Jamaican manufacturing sector equip itself for the future, understand what skills it needs, understand what skills it's going to need in the future, and help it to put the right mechanisms and the right ecosystem in place. So actually, it's quite a nice mix in that I think we've got opportunity to learn from other countries, but actually there's a number of countries, particularly as I say, Middle East, Jamaica, and others, where they're starting to look at their manufacturing sector and see the UK best in class. So I think that's a kind of an interesting mix. I think in terms of your question about, I think where would I rate the UK in terms of kind of technical and vocational education? I certainly don't think we're the best. I think there is a lot more work to do. I think if we had that right balance between demand for skills and supply of skills, I think we would be kind of there in the top. But the very fact we've got a skills gap shows that we've still got a lot more work to be done. I think the quality of the apprentices that we produce in the engineering and manufacturing sector are incredibly high quality because we've got the system that underpins that. We make sure that the outcomes are reliable and very robust because you've got organisations like awarding organisations like EAL and IMI in the mix, making sure that actually those individuals that achieve an apprenticeship, when we say they're competent, are actually competent to do the job. I think universities, there's some excellent degree courses. I think some universities actually probably need to do a little bit more in being able to deliver the skills needed for employers these days. So I think definitely more work to do, more room for improvement if it was a school report.
Love it. Thank you for being so honest. I really appreciate that. I suppose in a sense, linked to that last question, I'm really keen to understand sort of how you, as the CEO of Ingenuity, think about sort of measuring success. You know, what are your kind of key kind of metrics, you know, that you use to ascertain how you're doing, you know, against your strategy?
Yeah, we have a number of different metrics. We use something that's called the theory of change, which is a model that a number of different charities use. So some of our big macro kind of success measures are the productivity of the engineering and manufacturing sector. So is it becoming more productive? Because ultimately, if we're here to help improve skills and make sure that employees have got the talent, then that should flow through into an improvement in productivity. It'll be incredibly difficult for Ingenuity if productivity improves to say, actually, we were behind that and pat ourselves on the back. But it is a measure that we look at on a regular basis. We also look at things like the health of the sector. So is the sector thriving? So how are we doing in terms particularly about small businesses? Are we seeing an increase in small businesses going out of business, going into administration? Are we seeing them thriving? Are we seeing more coming through? So that's another kind of macro measure that we monitor, not just in terms of, I think, kind of how successful, how thriving the sector is, but also where Ingenuity can make some further kind of interventions. And then I think when we get into the micro measures, it's obviously things like how many people, how many employers have we actually had a positive impact on? How many individuals have, let's say, gone through our leadership training? How many young people have completed one of the Skills Miner Minecraft games and told us that their perception of engineering has actually improved and they want to think about a STEM career? So we do lots of kind of, I guess, counting in terms of how many people have used some of our practical tools like the games or some of the toolkits that we produce for employers, and others are more kind of qualitative. So the personal difference that a small investment in an SME manager makes to them and their career, or the difference that just giving somebody a bursary has made to somebody's kind of their own personal journey. And I guess to give you a good example, we've funded some bursaries for some young women to start engineering degrees with Teesside University that normally they wouldn't be able to afford to do. And one of them wrote to us thanking us for our small amounts of money, and said it would make such a huge difference to her because she now has to work fewer hours in her second job. So this is somebody who's got two jobs, is now going to university as a result of a small amount of money from Ingenuity. And the difference we made was she will hopefully in 3 years' time graduate with an engineering degree, but now having to work fewer hours in her second job. And I think it's when you hear and see stories like that, that's where you really think that's where we've made a difference.
So you've been big advocates and promoters of diversity, equality, and inclusion. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, EDI is really important to us as an organisation, but equally it's very important from a sector perspective. As we talked about earlier, we've got big skills gaps within engineering and manufacturing, so it's really important that as a sector we are very inclusive and very welcoming. But from an Ingenuity perspective, we do a lot of work in this area. The type of people that we employ are very, very specialist people, so we need to make sure that as an employer, we're an attractive place to work. So every year we have an employee engagement survey where one of the questions is around being able to feel comfortable and feel yourself at work, and we use that as a key measure. We report back to our remuneration committee every year in terms of gender equality, ethnicity equality, disability equality. So we monitor some kind of key KPIs, but also our people team are very kind of proactive in this area. It's something, as I say, we're very passionate about. So we do lots of things like menopause awareness. How can we be more of a accommodating and welcoming employer to people with disabilities? We do a lot around mental health, and we have internally mental health first aiders. But we then also use our expertise to actually help the sector and actually help particularly small businesses be more inclusive. So we've just recently launched a STEM toolkit, which gives some practical tools and advice to smaller businesses about how they can attract. So it's not just what Ingenuity does for itself, it's also how we can support the sector. So we feel that that's kind of very important as well.
Really interesting. We've been talking quite a lot about skills, obviously, out sort of from an external perspective. But I wanted to kind of ask you, you've had, great sort of interesting kind of career path yourself. What qualities do you look for when you're building a team? And how do you kind of create a culture where everyone thrives?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I think experience has kind of demonstrated to me that although when you're younger, qualifications are really, really important, but as you get older, actually, it's not about the qualifications that are generally important in the role you do. It's more about attitudes and behaviours. So some of the things that I look for when I'm building a team is that kind of that can-do attitude, people who like to solve problems, people who are not satisfied with the status quo and are up for a challenge, up for changing things. I think integrity is very important as well. Being within a team where actually you've got shared values and everybody has a high level of integrity. I think those are some of the kind of really, for me, kind of foundation bases of as a really great team. And as we've talked about, that kind of diversity, that inclusivity, different viewpoints are really important. If we were all the same, we would have the same solution, and we would stand still. So having different viewpoints and people being willing to listen and willing to be challenged, I think, is really important too.
we talked a lot about change, and we've talked about sort of, kind of various kind of factors accelerating that sort of as part of this conversation. But what kind of other trends are you seeing kind of coming down the line, and what steps are you looking to kind of take to prepare both, your team themselves, but also the wider sector?
Yeah, I mean, from a team perspective, obviously we've talked about technology. So technology is a big factor in terms of what we're looking at internally, how we equip our own people to understand the technology, and also what the technology can do for them. So we're just about to launch on a program of training in terms of AI, what that means, how it can be used positively, but also some of the things to be aware of when using AI. So we've already done a lot of work in terms of, yes, we're encouraging people to use tools like ChatGPT, but with that big health warning around it, which is be really careful in terms of what information you share with ChatGPT. You don't want to be sharing confidential information or personal information. So we're doing a lot of work around AI. Certainly, it's interesting also from a skills perspective, learning and development perspective, because we've touched on one of our commercial subsidiaries works in the qualification arena. So they're very interested in AI from a how do we ensure the validity of a learner's coursework? How do we make sure that actually it's not AI that's delivering that particular project and it's the individual itself? So that's something we're also looking at as well in terms of, but also how can we almost be some of those trailblazers in that particular area to do some of that first thinking, to set some of the guidelines for others to follow. And I think just generally, in the world in which we're living at the moment, and we're expecting potentially more turbulence today, just that whole piece around resilience and change management is very important. Because the world is changing, it's changing at a very rapid rate. We don't know what potentially is decisions are being made day to day, given things like trade tariffs and the impact that might flow through. And with new governments, you always get change. So that kind of that ability to live within a very changeable world, I think, is a very important skill set, again, that we're trying to help the teams to adopt and help the teams to be comfortable with. And I think that's equally important for the wider sector. From an ingenuity perspective, I think whilst we're in this very volatile world, the more that we can do to support employers to navigate things like the skills and education system and to take some of those pressures away, I think is really important. Because what we want the businesses to be able to do is focus on what they manufacture and what they engineer. And if we can take some of the pain points away in terms of how do I recruit an apprentice, how do I get these particular skills, then actually for us it's a good job done.
And finally, what one piece of advice would you give to someone entering the industry today?
I think one piece of advice I would give somebody entering the industry is, I think, just embrace it fully. The industry gives so many different opportunities. Learn as much as you can. Take every opportunity that is given to you. Ask questions. Ask to get involved in things. One of the things I always say to my team is, if you ask somebody something, or if you ask them if they can get involved, what's the worst thing they can say to you? It's no, but you can live with that. What you probably can't live with is never asking the question and never getting the opportunity.
What a great answer. Anne, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining Leap Forward.
Oh, it's been brilliant, Justin. I've really enjoyed it.